Revolution 250 podcast. I am Bob Allison, the chair of the Rev 250 Advisory Group. And Rev 250 is a consortium of organizations in and around New England looking at ways to commemorate the American Revolution. And our guests today come to us from Philadelphia, actually from the American Philosophical Society, the oldest learned organization in the country. I'll let them tell you more about it. Kyle Roberts, who is the Associate Director of the Library and Museum at the APS, and Bayard Miller, who's the Head of Digital Scholarship and Technology, and Sabrina Bocanegra, who is the Digitization Archivist, as well as the Project Data Manager for the very exciting project we're going to be talking about today. So thank you all for joining us.
Thanks for having us.
So the big project I wanted to talk about is the Revolutionary City Portal. Can you tell us a bit more about this and what you're doing and what you hope to do?
Yeah, sure. I can lead off if that's okay.
Thank you. That would be great.
Sounds good, Kyle.
For a long time, we've been very aware in the library that we have collections that relate to Philadelphia in the colonial period that have other components at other area institutions. As I think, Bob, you and your listeners know, Philadelphia is a very rich city when it comes to archives. So the Library Company of Philadelphia, founded a few years before the APS. So APS was founded in 1743. The Historical Society of Pennsylvania, founded in 1824. We have collections that relate to the same people, but because one donor gave a gift at one point, and another donor gave something 100 years later, they're all spread apart. And as we've been looking ahead to 2026 and thinking about the very interesting stories and the very important role that Philadelphia played during the American Revolution, we really, for a long time, had the desire to try to bring these collections back together. I can guarantee you our three old institutions are not going to merge into one. So it felt like a digital approach was probably the best way to figure out how to make that happen. At the APS, we've been able to take the lead because we have a fantastic Center for Digital Scholarship. And maybe I'll hand it over to Bayard Miller, who's the head of digital scholarship, to talk a little bit about what that might entail.
Great. Thanks, Kyle.
Yeah, no, it's great. And like Kyle said, this gives us sort of the first opportunity to really unite a lot of these collections by doing it digitally, right? We've been doing digitization projects here for a very long time. We have a robust digitization program. So it just seemed natural that we would do this project. So the basic idea for us was to create just a one-stop shop for the revolution as it took place in Philadelphia with these documents. But how do you do that if they live separately? So digitization is key to that. So basically, our idea was to we'll digitize materials from APS, HSP, LCP, and we'll build out just a freestanding portal, right? So we have our own digital library here at the APS, but since this is such a big venture and a joint venture for all these three institutions, we wanted to make sure that it had its separate presence as separate from the APS main collection. But the beauty of it is that, as Kyle was alluding to as well, we have Jasper Yates papers here at the APS. They have some at HSP. These collections don't really speak to one another, but now at the end of this project, they will be able to be reunited, right? So researchers, will no longer have to go to each institution when they come to Philadelphia, or if they can't come to Philadelphia, they'll be able to access all these collections all in one spot. And the way in which we do this is through metadata and sort of these metadata protocols that we've created for the project, which maybe Sabrina, you could jump on top of that.
Great.
Yeah, so basically what we did was looked at how we could transform the existing metadata that all of these collections had, whether it was through a finding aid or collection guide, or even digital objects that are already, or materials that are already online in a digital repository. So really just working from those finding aids and looking how to enhance those fields that would enhance this, this bigger picture of the American Revolution. So fields like title or description or the abstract and subjects, really nailing those down and thinking about how people are going to find this information, what's going to be useful to people that are looking for whatever these documents entail, whether it is like Bayard said, Jasper Yates. Yeah, we can say these are both Jasper Yates collections, but the metadata within it that is going to connect them is really what we want to get at.
Can you tell those of us who don't know what metadata is?
Yeah, of course. So metadata is really, in a nutshell, just information about what you record about an object. So it really provides the context to the content that you're working with. So kind of just, the who, what, where, when, and why of an object that lets you help to discover and interact with it.
Okay.
Yeah, if I can interject real quick, Bob, just to add to that, the other great part about this project with the metadata is that, so a lot of these collections have been processed over the years for a very long time. We've been collecting for a long time, and the metadata isn't very robust, right? There's very bare bones, just core metadata, title, the person whose collection it is, dates, stuff like that. This project and the way we're going to get these collections to sort of be united is by enhancing that metadata. It's giving us the opportunity to dive in and go through every single document and give it more than just that title and that date. So that way everything is far more discoverable.
That's great. That's great. So, this is really a great story about institutions collaborating with each other, making this material available to the rest of us so that, the naive scholar who doesn't realize there's a difference between the Historical Society of Pennsylvania and the Library Company of Philadelphia will be able to find, say, the Jasper Yates papers or the stories we're looking for. So what are some of the surprising things you're finding in this material? I mean, are you finding new ideas, new voices in the revolution as you're looking through this?
I can't see Kyle's face. I don't know if he wants to take over or not. Anyone who's go with this. So that is, I'll just speak. That is like the main part of this project, right? So we take it. So we wanted to make sure that we tell different narratives of the revolution than the ones that we already have, right? So the goal of all this metadata enhancement is to pull out marginalized voices, underrepresented voices. We also wanted to do this in a way, there are other voices that come to this project in ways that never have before with a digitization project like this. So we created a committee of stakeholders, so 16 educators, archivists, scholars from across the country to come and join us to see how we go about finding these voices. So it's been really interesting. As well as things that we've pulled out. I don't know, Sabrina or Kyle, do you have anything you can share of things that we found so far?
I'd be happy to jump in if that's
okay.
Sorry.
No, go ahead, Kyle.
So one of the exercises that we did with the stakeholders was we pulled out a bunch of material and we didn't show them the metadata on it. We said, just look at this material. Sabrina can talk about one of the diaries that we provided. One of the things that I was really excited about was this broadside of French verbs published in 1780. And according to the APS, this was just shelved with other linguistic material. But when you start to think about, well, why would Philadelphians in 1780 be interested in French verbs? And then you start to look at the images and you realize there's a really beautiful engraving of a ship coming into a harbor. And what we start to realize is that these materials which you just couldn't find, that Bob, you or I, we could go into the reading room, on one of our academic breaks, so we could look through this stuff, but that somebody who's interested in, arguably our most important ally coming into the war would miss this fantastic document, right? Where basically Philadelphians who probably don't know French are getting a kind of a quick and easy lesson about, the words they're going to need as soldiers are coming through, as we're working with these allies. So I think on that level, just these, it's stopping and re-looking at these documents and realizing there was nothing wrong with calling it linguistic material. That's what it is. But the social history of why it was produced,
right?
Is going to help the scholar. It's going to help the high school student, maybe, who's doing a National History Day project, trying to figure out, why Lafayette matters. It's going to help, the genealogist, right? Who might be descended from a soldier who stayed, who stayed behind. So that's, for me, that's one of the ones that I've really enjoyed thus far. I mean, we are very early in the process. don't know, Sabrina, if you want to talk about that great diary and what it looked like by
Mhm.
having the stakeholders look at it instead of just, the cataloging archivist.
Right. Yeah. So, like Kyle said, we're very early on in this project, so there's not a lot that we have digitized. But I mean, that one letter book that Kyle's referring to is the Elizabeth Farmer letter book that was at HSP, and that was actually already digitized in their repository. So what we did was look at that metadata, and like Bayard said, very core metadata. So a title, what collection it was, and a couple of different, subjects and names. But that was really it. So we had our stakeholders look at this material and come up with pretty much whatever they wanted. You know, I gave a definition of metadata, but what's important to you? What's important for you to pull out of this letter book? And I wish I could show this, but like the amount of phrases and keywords and descriptions that came out of that conversation after they looked at this letter book was really amazing. And it, for me as a metadata creator, it really opened my eyes as to like how many different ways that I could approach this object. So domestic life and family life during the revolution, but also just like very specific, like just gardening, what's happening with sustenance, like in the revolution, like how are people getting their food and different other household objects. It was really interesting. And I have actually a lot more to say about just other objects that I've been working with recently. So, I mean, pulling out the Julia Rush letters, that is something that, it would be tagged with women or women in the revolution. But there's so much more to that. She's a young woman that's getting married at 16. She's in her child rearing age. So like a lot of stuff about that. And so what else? The Sarah Franklin Beige papers, not just, Benjamin Franklin's daughter, but really some great examples of women's social networks within the revolution and how she was really important to what's happening during that time. I'm not going to just talk about women. I mean, there's prisoners of war, Quakers. I've got a lot, like with these broadsides, especially the mobilized populace, like you think about how this reveals what the population was reading at the time, or maybe not even reading, but because are not reading, but listening to in different forums and whatnot. And much of it has to do right now with, recruiting soldiers for either of the armies. But I hope that there will be a lot more when we start digitizing this material.
Right. So some of this material has been, but most of it has not been. And as you said, the reason, the hook for the Sarah Franklin Beige papers is she was Benjamin Franklin's daughter, but actually she's an interesting person in her own right. And then she's raising this family in this big house. And so she's there when her father is off in France during the war years. So you learn a lot from this about what's happening in the lives of ordinary people. Franklin really looms large, but you take him out of the equation, and the Franklins are a very ordinary family. And they, so you're getting more of these different voices. You mentioned prisoners of war. Have you found anything more on prisoners of war in Philadelphia?
I've just digitized the Samuel Miles papers. So it's a lot about the Virginia exiles and what's going on there and their whole, that's something that is published, like the transactions of the exiles, but this is like the actual draft of what's going on and their account of being a prisoners of war. So it's
so
really
who are the exiles, for those who don't know?
There are mostly Pennsylvania Quakers, as I'm learning that they're not all Quakers that are being accused of either not signing an oath to the, a loyalty oath to the Continental Army or the American states, but also are possibly, feeding information to the British or whatnot. So they get arrested just off the bat. I'm probably not going to say a good explanation of this, but it's really interesting. Yeah, they get arrested and they get sent to Virginia for I think 2 years. Don't quote me on that, but yeah. So and then they make their way back. So they are telling the story of their whole account who got arrested, why they think they got arrested, all of these, these stories of why it's not right and whatnot. So
Yeah,
yeah.
fascinating. I mean, you really are getting at the raw material and the stories right there before some historian mucks it up or embellishes it or puts it in context, which makes it a very exciting project. You are getting these original source, the primary sources here, and really a firsthand look at what's happening in Philadelphia at this time. So what are some of the surprising things that any of you have found as you've begun this project?
I can jump in.
Sure.
This is a new process for us. And I think that was really the eye-opening part. It was, so I've been at the APS for 2 years, and before that was at a university digital humanities center, which also had a strong public history program. And you too often in the institutions like that get the money to digitize, but you don't get the money necessarily to be in conversation with the people who use it. And you promise that you'll make the stuff available. But usually you do that in the last couple of months, you do it at the tail end. And I think what has been really most surprising for me is that the outcome looks a lot different. When you ask the users from the start, what do they want? What do they need? What do they like? Some of the things you can't do. So one of our 16 stakeholders is a historic reenactor, and is, doesn't have a PhD, it just has a lifelong interest in history, and doesn't read cursive very well. And so he's talking about, well, what about transcriptions? Where do they fall? That's a tall order, because there's going to be over 100,000 pages of manuscript material. But what we can do is better descriptions, much lengthier descriptions of the content that's in there. Another thing, and then I'll turn it over to my colleagues, another thing that was that came out of those conversations was a frustration that, and this came from a scholar who's used these materials in their archival form. Why is it that we only get the name of the person who wrote the letter and the person who received the letter? Why can't we have the names of the people who are inside the letter, right? What are the stories that you might not get if you just look at the finding aid and only see to and from? Now, for somebody that's not a critique of the person who processed the collection, because they probably had 5 collections they had to get through in a year, and they had to move quickly. But out of that conversation, we committed that we're going to do that work, that in the process of digitization and making the metadata, that it is a priority to put the names in the locations that are all on it. I think I was thinking about this on the way in. Sometimes historians take a lot of pride in having discovered things, right? Like, well, I found, I went in and I'm the first one who saw that Alexander Hamilton is named in that letter. But I think we're not really in the business anymore of discovering facts. We're in the business of facilitating analysis, right? And that we facilitate analysis by really making things as accessible as possible. And so making sure that cursive isn't a barrier, making sure that not providing all the information that we can glean from it, all the facts that we can glean from it. Those are things that we can commit to doing. And I would say that if we hadn't had those stakeholder conversations, those might not have been on our radar. We might have moved forward as business as usual. But that's sort of my take. I don't know, Byron and Sabrina, if you feel in similar ways.
I'd agree with you about, especially about the stakeholder conversations, and that's what I was shocked by. Not shocked, I knew, I guess, but like how much we were able to learn from stakeholders, right? We do all of our projects sort of in a silo. We like to think that we know exactly what our users want when we're designing digital projects, when we're designing digital libraries, metadata, because we know how to use this stuff. We know how to navigate a digital library. We know how to use faceted searching. But I guess I wasn't shocked, but a lot of people don't know how to do that, right? I think that things work perfectly, and they're like, well, this doesn't work at all. I'm like, oh, I didn't realize that. And then, so I think that I'm just so pleasantly surprised, I guess, I think we're going to have such a much better product by incorporating all these voices of people outside of the library world, outside of the historian world, bringing them in and being like, oh, well, this is how a normal person would use this, or this is how a high school student would use this. This is where they would go. So I think that's my biggest takeaway, is to not be so, I think closed-minded is the wrong word, but like when I'm developing projects, like try to actually reach out and be able to take criticisms.
Great. So we're talking with Kyle Roberts and Bayard Miller, who are the co-managers of the Revolutionary City Portal project, and Sabrina Bocanegra, who is the project data manager for the project, as well as the digitization archivist from the American Philosophical Society in Philadelphia. So how easy is it to get these partner organizations to work together?
Kyle?
Well, I mean, you joke, but I mean, I think it's not as hard as it could have been, right? Each institution, of course, has been around for centuries, has its own ways of doing things, but there is a long history of collaboration in different forms. I think that we have been really, really happy with the receptiveness of our partner institutions in ways that we thought very deliberately about what we could offer, that, and one of those things was hosting. That each of the institutions has different types of digital libraries, and that the APS said from the start, we will make all of this available to you. We'll help facilitate the work of digitization. We will host it so that it's always on our site. We'll help you host it in the ways that you want to. So I mean, I think that helped out immensely. One of the reasons I think that's important is because while we're starting with these institutions in the second and third phases, we will go to other institutions in the Philadelphia area. So if you're, a small congregation, religious congregation in the colonial church, you probably don't have your own digital library.
Right.
So us being able to say, not only will we help digitize this, but we'll also make it available. I would give a kind of shout out to the Congregational Library in Boston.
Yes.
I think it's really done a very nice model of that. So I have found working on that level, Bayard and Sabrina really are the ones who have to get into the trenches with our colleagues at the other institutions and work cheek by jowl on this. So they might have ideas about what it's meant to them.
Yeah, I'll just say briefly, I mean, it's been really great, actually. Surprisingly, that's something I was surprised about, because it is difficult, right? Because all of us as institutions, we do things very differently when it comes to digitization, when it comes to cataloging. So what we didn't want to do was go to our partner organization to be like, oh no, you have to do it this way. It's more of a conversation. It's really good. So in that, we've sent Sabrina did a stint working at HSP with their collections. So it's like a, I don't know, Sabrina, you want to say something about that? I think that's how we.
Yeah, I think it's not that it's a unique situation, but I mean, I've done this before, where I worked on digital projects where, there's guidelines set up beforehand and you just kind of have to follow it. Whereas I come in here and we're kind of doing this together, and we're talking to LCP, or Library Company, and we're talking to the Historical Society of Pennsylvania, and, getting feedback on, is this the type of, is these the type of guidelines that you think that will work for, scalability and beyond this pilot project? So that's been exciting to, kind of work from the ground up and not just go into it knowing that you have to do this. So that's been great.
So what about the transcription piece of it? I mean, that's often the most time-consuming, expensive part of the project. So have you given thought to how that will happen? I mean, I know the Congregational Library is having kind of crowdsourcing for a lot of it, or having classes do this. I mean, it's a great project that you're doing. I'm wondering if you're looking ahead to that piece of it.
Yeah, so I can jump in. So I would say that Right now, so we're still early on. We just finished our first pilot phase, the IMLS funded portion of it, just based on metadata enhancement, right? So we want things to be available, findable, usable at the end of this. So that's the way we do that. We decided, so transcriptions, if they're already readily available, we're building out the portals so that we can accommodate them, that they'll be fully searchable. So basically, it's all my way of saying that we're open to transcription. We just don't know how that would look for this project at this stage. You guys might do that.
I mean, there's definitely a lot of things that we're thinking about because of the stakeholders and everyone that I've talked to about this project is like transcription. And so it's on our minds. I believe that we're looking at, crowdsourcing different, transcription events, how we can use that as programming as well, and Kyle maybe can talk about that. But also just working with the stakeholders gave me more confidence to reach out to researchers about the materials that I'm working with. So I'm open to having researchers give me their transcriptions or their willingness to help out with these types of things that they're already working with. So why not, add to the metadata and help build this portal, not build it, but make it useful and meaningful.
So Sabrina, being immersed in digitizing these things, hasn't made you want to stop and just become an historian?
What am I allowed to say here? No, I enjoy learning about a lot of different histories. I don't know, I know why I am an archivist is because I can't pinpoint one thing that I would want to do my research on. There's too much exciting things happening, too many interesting things happening, and this is just one of the great projects that I've been able to work on. So I'm not going to be a historian anytime soon.
Okay. Well, you really are the people who make historians' work possible. That is, you allow us to think we've discovered things when, in fact, you've made them available. So, Jay Hershey has a comment about an online digital guide to orderly books and a tree identifying those that overlap, those that are more legible, et cetera, and an index for all. One of the great things about having a project like this, it gets us to think about other kinds of projects you could be doing when this is really a terrific one you've launched on. Have you, I don't know if you want to address Jay's question about orderly books.
Yeah, we've done nothing with orderly books up to this point. I mean, it's a great idea. We've done that with other projects here where we're connecting different collection items and sort of visualizing them. I think that's what Jay's sort of getting at, like building out some sort of visualization that connects all these other. That's the goal of this project, right? And then we would be able to do that with the metadata is like, okay, there's orderly books here, LCP, HSP, APS, these all unite somehow, and we can sort of visualize that. So that would be the goal, is to build out visualizations that link different collection items, and we can certainly do that for sure.
If I can jump in as well. So the APS launched in January of 2020, the David Center for the American Revolution Research Center here, which I think many of your listeners remember the David Library of the American Revolution out in Washington's Crossing. One of the crown jewels of that collection are 9,000 reels of microfilm, which have so many orderly books in them. So while the Rev City project has a very clear beginning and end date, 1774 to 1783, things created in or received in Philadelphia. The David Center's microfilm collection is going to be digitized as well.
Wow.
And it's going to be digitized initially for internal use. It's made up of many, many institutions' holdings. And of course, it's not our place to assume we have the rights permissions just to publish it. But we do want to digitize it so that scholars who come on site, and I want to say with the long-term goal of working with those other organizations to make that material available. But we have extensive finding aids that go with that. So when I think about Jay's question, I'm thinking about those reels, which are going to get you much more than Philadelphia, will be available as PDFs that you can sort of use and take with you. And that work of starting to create the connective tissue, right? So that these aren't just, random primary sources, but in fact you can see, okay, here are all the ones from this year in this region.
Right.
I think that's probably going to come together in that project.
No, that's terrific. We've been talking with Kyle Roberts, Bayard Miller, and Sabrina Bocanegra from the American Philosophical Society in Philadelphia. Is there any worry, I mean, as you're doing the digitization of these collections, that people aren't going to come into your buildings anymore to look at the papers?
Nope. No. So, yeah, people like working with materials, like actual materials. I'm sure you know that. There's nothing like working in a reading room. Plus, everything's not going to be available for during this. And there's no way we could digitize the entirety of our collections. It would take, 100 years. I mean, a long time. This is just to get people for this one very specific thing, focused on a very specific area. But there's still so much other material here that would supplement the research, right? So I don't fear that.
We have definitely found what many archivists have found, that people love the digital, but it makes them want to see the material more. Sometimes it's out of a little bit of skepticism. They want to double check, that everything was actually digitized. They want to look on the backside if they can't see that. Another part, and this came out in our conversations with stakeholders, is there's a lot of people who are interested in, and I think it's a result of the digital age, materiality. And, and by that I mean, what did a letter look like? How big was a newspaper? How, was it folded? What is a broadside? Do we still have broadsides? And that we have not, as digital people, done a great job of really being able to convey online, because Bob, you might have a really big monitor in front of you, and I have a small laptop.
Right. Yeah.
It's really hard to preserve the sizes and feel. And we are very open. A lot of the researchers who come for collections sometimes that are available in other ways, but come because they know they can look at they want to hold the original Ben Franklin letter in their hands.
Right.
And we're there to make that happen. That's our mission, is to make sure they can do that. If you bring your lemon, though, and you're trying to find secret messages on the back sides of our documents, we don't allow that. So I'll just put that out there.
Are you going to put those in the digital format, the secret messages?
Yes, that's part of Sabrina's job, is to find secret messages. That's what enhanced metadata is all about.
Thank you. So we've been talking with Kyle Roberts, Bayard Miller, and Sabrina Bocanegra from the American Philosophical Society. And of course, talking to folks from the American Philosophical Society who are doing this project with a library company, Make Us Bostonians. Think about the one who got away, that is Benjamin Franklin, who left Boston at the age of 16 and went off and founded your institutions in Philadelphia. So anything else we should say before we close?
I can just add that the site is live. This project is active and ongoing. I don't know how to send out the link, but it's therevolutionarycity.org. We're always interested in hearing feedback. There's contact info there. But feel free to reach out to any one of us.
Great, thank you.
With any questions you have.
So therevolutionarycity.org is the link, and you can see the work that Sabrina and Bayard and Kyle are doing to make all of these terrific stories available. So thank you all for joining us, and thank you all for listening on the Revolution 250 podcast. I just want to shout out to a couple of our listeners. We're able to see where people are listening from, and so we initially thought we'd get listeners here in Massachusetts, and we do have Dorchester, and we also have Sabrina, Haverhill, Massachusetts. We have regular listeners in other parts of the Bay State, as well as Tel Aviv and Nuremberg and Nottingham and Voorhees Township, New Jersey. So thank everyone. If you have questions or ideas for things you would like us to talk about, send me an email, rallison@suffolk.edu, and I'll look forward to seeing everyone next time. And now we'll be piped out on the road to Boston.